Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ashley Tries to Justify the Fact That She Spent 3 years in film school. I'm your host, just another film student who tries to casually work into all conversation that she went to film school in order to feel superior despite the fact that she was too afraid of rejection to ever actually finish her screenplay, so she fled Hollywood forever and now just occasionally critiques TV shows and movies from the comfortable distance of a YouTube video. Welcome. Okay, right off the bat, obviously I recommend watching Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, except for the last season, which was absolute trash, and Black Mirror, but you guys have probably been bashed over the head with those recommendations for the past like 3 years, so I'm gonna try to focus on some shows that you guys might not have heard of or that I think are a little bit underhyped. And also, I legitimately will take any excuse possible to just geek out about TV shows and movies. So my first recommendation is Fleabag. Fleabag is a dark comedy about a directionless 20-something living in London who is coping with the recent death of her best friend. Her best friend, Boo, was trying to earn sympathy from her cheating ex-boyfriend by throwing herself in front of a bus and injuring herself just enough to get into the hospital, but she accidentally threw herself in front of too big of a bus, and so then she died. If that isn't a fun premise for a sitcom, I don't know what is. So it's kind of like a sitcom, but also this mystery of what happened to Fleabag, what really happened with her friend's death. Obviously, the show has a pretty dark sense of humor, and it has some pretty dark themes about coping with grief and loss and self-hatred, but it is also overwhelmingly so funny. It's one of those shows that will make you laugh out loud and will also make you cry, and that is my favorite type of show. Throughout the series, the main character breaks the fourth wall, so that's when a character in a movie or a TV show directly addresses the camera or the audience.
And I'll be sure to treat you like a nasty little bitch. That was a joke.
Oh no,
Sorry.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay, that was like, oh, okay.
This show is created by and stars Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and I would literally, and I don't use the word literally often, kill a small child for Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is who I want to be when I grow up. She is so funny, she is an impeccable writer, but unlike a lot of directors who try to act in their own writing, Tarantino, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is actually an incredibly good actress as well. What I love about this show, other than the excellent British humor, is that it is written by and about women, and it feels like the female characters are real. As I grow up, I realize more and more that I spent pretty much my entire life watching female characters that were written by men, and they always fall into the uncanny valley of what a woman actually is. They're either too much of a sex object, they're too ditzy, they're too catty, or now there's this new hashtag girl boss woman who always has the right punchline and she's super strong, but in a masculine way, and she doesn't actually have any flaws, and that's supposed to be female empowerment, when in reality, those characters are too perfect to actually feel real either. So what I love about Fleabag is that all of the female characters are deeply flawed and deeply fucked up, but they're also smart and they're funny, they're sexual, but they're not kind of a sex object in the eye of the camera. They just feel real, and I appreciate that so much.
Please raise your hands if you would trade 5 years of your life for the so-called perfect body.
We're bad feminists.
If after watching Fleabag, you are craving some more Phoebe Waller-Bridge written material, which I promise you, you will be, I would also recommend the TV show she made before Fleabag, which is called Crashing. It follows 6 20-somethings that are living in an abandoned hospital in order to get cheaper rent. One character moved there to try to get together with her longtime best friend, who actually has a girlfriend. One of them is trying to figure out their sexuality, so it's a very classic 20-something rom-com vibe. It's a lot more lighthearted than Fleabag, and a little bit less of a developed show character-wise, but it was still a really fun watch. Next up, we have Fargo, a criminally underrated show. But because it's a crime show? I'm sorry. God, I would be such a good dad. Fargo is a black comedy / crime show that follows everyday Minnesotan folk who get wrapped up in the world of crime, murder, and drug dealing. Dun dun dun! The first season follows this mild-mannered Minnesotan insurance salesman named Lester, who is constantly belittled by his more successful older brother, his high school bully who lives in the same town, and kind of emotionally abused by his wife. One day after Lester gets beat up, he by chance encounters this mysterious hitman named Malvo in the waiting room of the hospital, and Malvo gives him his number. That night, Lester snaps and murders his wife and ends up calling this mysterious hitman in order to help him clean up. What follows is kind of a slow-burning and awkward version of Breaking Bad, where Lester, this once innocent guy, gets dragged deeper into this criminal world and he tries to hide from the police. If you've seen the movie Fargo by the Coen brothers and are now forever scarred by wood choppers, the TV show Fargo is set kind of in the same Midwestern world. It's in the same tone about people who don't know what the fuck they're doing accidentally getting into crime, but it doesn't actually retell any of the story of Fargo. It's just kind of like inspired by that world, which I like a lot because I think that if a movie has done something really well, why would you make it into a TV show and make it worse? Fargo's an anthology series, so every single season has a new plotline, a new time period, a new cast, a completely new story. I really like that because each season kind of feels like a movie in and of itself. It all wraps up very neatly. You don't get any Game of Thrones shit happening where they kind of like fucked up the ending and then ruined the whole series for you retrospectively. If you like Tarantino movies, Breaking Bad, The Godfather, if you want something that keeps you at the edge of your seat, if you want a little bit of an adventure, I would definitely recommend Fargo. My next recommendation is Love on Netflix. I would describe Love as kind of an anti-rom-com. It basically takes all of your expectations of a rom-com and flips them on its head and takes a much more realistic look at dating. And I think it is a great show to watch if, like me, you grew up on all of these like cheesy 2000s rom-coms that set honestly incredibly unrealistic expectations for what a relationship should look like. The story takes place in Silver Lake in Los Angeles, and it follows two people, Mickey, who's a radio producer, and Gus, who is an on-set tutor for child actors, who both go through rough breakups and then serendipitously meet. However, we are left to question throughout the series as their relationship goes through trials and tribulations and ups and downs, whether the relationship is actually good for them. Mickey is kind of the shell of a manic pixie dream girl. From the outset, she seems very cool, she seems adventurous, she seems like she doesn't really give a shit, she's kind of a badass, but she also struggles with alcohol addiction and sex and love addiction. So at the beginning of the series, she actually starts going to sex and love addict meetings, but then gets into this relationship. And Gus is kind of the shell of the like nerdy writer boy that literally all male writers write themselves into in rom-coms, who somehow miraculously get a girl who's a fucking 10. Basically, he seems like the endearing nerdy writer boy who needs an adventurous girl to show him all he has to live for, when in reality, this guy is actually kind of an asshole and he's actually not nearly as good a writer as he actually thinks. So throughout the series, we're like, should we actually root for their relationship? Are they good together? Or are they just two desperate and lonely people clinging on to each other because they need validation and deluding themselves into thinking that this relationship is working? I feel like I both relate to Mickey and Gus in different ways. I've been in relationships where a guy has like projected Manny Pixic dream girl syndrome onto me and has seen me as this exotic, fun, quirky girl who would like fix his life. But I also feel like I have been the angsty writer who wanted somebody who was like way hotter and way cooler without actually caring what they were feeling like on the inside. And I have also definitely leaned on relationships or dating as a form of validation and a way to kind of like distract myself from my own problems. So this show is really calling me out, but I like it a lot. And now, a brief intermission for a speed round of my favorite sitcoms, because if I talked about all of them extensively, this video would literally be like an hour long. So first up, as you can probably tell by my bangs, I grew up watching New Girl. All of the characters are super lovable in their own way, and it literally just feels like hanging out with your friends. If The Office is a little bit too cringy for you and you get really bad secondhand embarrassment, I think Parks and Rec is a great alternative. Also, just a really optimistic, funny show. 30 Rock, another fantastic sitcom. It's written by and stars Tina Fey, and I would literally eat a small child for Tina Fey. The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt is also so funny and very out there, also written by Tina Fey, also impeccable because that woman can do no wrong. Sex and the City is so cheesy, but still so much fun. Definitely has a lot of like 90s feminism that isn't completely up to date. And by that I mean it's very much not up to date, but it's still such a fun show to watch. Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23 is great to watch if you have nostalgia for like early 2000s energy rom-coms. Jane by Design was my favorite show growing up. It literally inspired me to get into fashion. And lastly, I know House isn't a sitcom, it's a medical drama, but I wanted to include it because I literally watched every single episode of this show. First of all, because it's a very good show, but second of all, because in high school I had the biggest crush on this Australian boy in my class, and there's an Australian character in House, so I would literally come home and watch this TV show every single day just so that I could fantasize about this Australian boy in my class. And that ends my speed round. Now on to me taking much longer to explain the plotline of shows. I would be remiss if I did not put BoJack Horseman on my list. BoJack Horseman is an animated show that takes place in this kind of absurdist version of Hollywood where half the characters are humans and half of them are animated animals, which is never really explained as a choice, but you kind of just learn to run with it. But basically the main storyline follows BoJack, who is this burnt out, has-been 90s sitcom actor. He used to be really famous back in the day, but he feels like his life has already peaked. And now he lives alone in a Hollywood mansion. He is struggling with alcoholism, depression, he has a bunch of meaningless hookups, and he's trying to find purpose in his life again. The series starts off with BoJack finally deciding to hire a ghostwriter to write his autobiography. He meets the writer, her name is Diane, and finally, for like the first time in years, he actually connects with somebody, but he finds out that Diane is dating his kind of nemesis in Hollywood, this obnoxiously happy-go-lucky guy named, well, it's a dog. His name is Mr. Peanut Butter. This show sounds so dumb when I explain it out loud, but I promise you, it is like an actual cinematic masterpiece. It is so well written, and again, it's one of those shows that makes me cry in one scene and laugh in the other. Despite being literally about cartoon animals, it is one of the most touching and well-written looks at depression, mental illness, addiction, and suicide that I've ever seen. Shows and movies about Hollywood can tend to be a giant Hollywood circle jerk, La La Land, but BoJack honestly tears Hollywood a new one. It tears Hollywood apart for the money-making machine that doesn't really care about telling interesting stories and more just cares about making money and recycling old narratives that people find really comfortable. It talks about the news cycle, it talks about celebrity culture, it talks about child stardom and how fucked up it is, and it does all of that while genuinely managing to be really funny. Like, I think of any show that I've watched, BoJack Horseman packs in the most jokes per minute. Even in set design, they do such a great job. Like, if you pause BoJack at any moment, you'll be able to read, for example, all of the storefronts that the characters are walking past, and every single one will have like a little joke or a pun on it. Another thing I love about BoJack is at the onset, it seems like it's gonna be that classic story of like the male anti-hero who is kind of a terrible person, he is kind of a dick to people, but through the power of love and the woman in his life, he redeems himself and becomes a good person and lives happily ever after. BoJack really turns that expectation on its head. You do at times have sympathy for the main character BoJack, but throughout the series you really question, is he a good person, and to what extent are his actions excusable? To what extent does he deserve to suffer the consequences? Without spoiling too much, this show does a great job of giving the characters around BoJack kind of happy and full character arcs, and they have some great episodes focusing on the side characters, which are some of my favorite. I sound like I'm gonna cry, but I was just burping out LaCroix bubbles. Next up, I thought I would talk about some stand-up comedians, since I'm sure you've seen like everywhere on Netflix, there are a ton of stand-up specials, and they're one of my favorite things to watch, especially if I only have like an hour to kill. So, first up, John Mulaney. His sets are so well written. He often incorporates dark humor or dark shit that happened to him in his past, but he presents it with this 50s game show host persona that's super cheery. So it's like a really interesting contrast. He always relies on wit and good storytelling and never falls on like gender or race stereotypes, which is annoyingly rare to find in male comedians nowadays. Every single one of his stand-up specials on Netflix are absolutely worth a watch. And I also love John Mulaney and the Sack Lunch Bunch, which is this like weird satirical musical special kids show that he did, which sounds bizarre, but I promise you it was actually a really fun time to watch. And I am not even a big kids person, given the fact that I would kill children for like most of these celebrities that I don't even know. Also, Big Mouth is so funny. John Mulaney acts in it, and it's written by his best friend Nick Kroll. It captures how awkward puberty is in the most incredible way, and I would give it a full review, but I've already been ending this video for like 3 days, and it's 30 minutes long, so I'm gonna move along now. Next up, I love Daniel Sloss, particularly his Netflix special Jigsaw. His sense of humor is super dark and funny, and he also has a Scottish accent, which makes all of his jokes like at least 20% better. Basically, in all of his sets, he'll do jokes for like 40 minutes, and then at the end, there's this 20-minute kind of comedic TED Talk where he will talk about an actually kind of serious issue that he cares about, and that is my favorite. Maybe just because I'm a nerd who likes TED Talks. His kind of rant at the end of Jigsaw literally like changed my perspective on relationships. Basically, what Daniel Sloss says is that there are too many people in this world who are just in relationships because they're too afraid to be alone. One of my favorite lines from the whole show was, "If you don't love 100% of me, you don't love me. You love a version of me that you made up in my head, and it's not my fault if I don't live up to it." Something I think nearly everybody experiences in relationships is that you kind of subtly, oftentimes without realizing it, edit down yourself into a version of yourself that you know the other person would like. For me, it was losing any feminist side in myself. I just stopped talking about feminism, or I stopped bringing up certain points because I knew my boyfriend at the time wouldn't really relate or engage with it at all. I think that's partially on me because I definitely have the tendency to like calculate in my mind what type of girl the guy would like and turn into that, but I'm trying to like shut that part of my brain off and just be like, be yourself. If the person doesn't fuck with you as yourself, they're not for you. Move along. So please give Jigsaw a watch if you're in a relationship or if you're single. I think it is, like, honestly, that should be some shit that they teach you in public school because it is so valuable. I read a tweet that LaCroix is just aggressive water, and I think that's so true. It makes me like burp, it makes my stomach so uncomfortable, but I love this shit so much. What's wrong with me? Next up, I love Katherine Ryan. If you guys have seen that thing on TikTok that's like,
my mom said to me, "You know, sweetheart, one day you should settle down and marry a rich man." And I said, "Mom, I am a rich man."
Katherine Ryan exudes that exact energy. She's a single mom in her 30s and such a badass. Her stand-up sets, so funny, so raunchy, but they also leave me just feeling like good about myself. I feel like empowerment is such a buzzword, but I do feel like fucking empowered. I feel like I can do anything after watching a Katherine Ryan stand-up set. And then lastly, Bo Burnham. He started out on YouTube literally singing like silly songs on his webcam, and now his stand-up sets are mostly musical comedy. I still to this day love his last stand-up set ever, Make Happy, and particularly the finale of that. Basically, he like does this little auto-tuned song that's about sacrificing your own happiness as an entertainer in order to make other people happy, which I find deeply unrelatable. Have never felt any of those emotions. I would also recommend, Bo Burnham was a guest on Pete Holmes's podcast. It is 3 hours of some of the best conversation I've ever heard. I love that episode so much, I've listened to it multiple times, and who the fuck re-listens to a podcast episode? I would also like to be Bo Burnham's friend very bad. I saw him once, but I was in my car and he was walking, and I was literally like this close to jumping out of my car to say hi to Bo Burnham, but I didn't want to like kill anybody or seem like an absolute psychopath when I'm in reality kind of a medium level psychopath, so I didn't say hi to him. But Bo Burnham, if you're watching this, or any of Bo Burnham's friends, I would like to hang out with that man, thanks. That's all of my stand-up recommendations, but my next TV show is Years and Years. This is kind of a Black Mirror-esque TV show in that it follows this extended family over a period of the next 15 years. And every episode skips a couple years in the future, and each year there are these new predictions for what technology might turn into, politics, immigration law, and it paints this really like fascinating picture of the future, although also kind of a depressing picture of the future. If you miss the earlier seasons of Black Mirror when it wasn't absolute trash like it is now, I would really recommend watching this show. I love like just thinking about the future and what it might hold, but I also really like that this show took those predictions about the future and let us see them develop over years and years. Like, you know how in Black Mirror it just drops you off in some year in the future, and it's like, this is what society is now. But what I liked about Years and Years is that it shows kind of realistically how we could go from the society we have now to this like absolutely batshit society that they have by the end of the series. It definitely kept me on the edge of my seat, and I think I watched the whole thing in one night because I just wanted to see what was happening in the next episode. Next on my list is The Girlfriend Experience. So this show is about Christine, a bright but lonely college student who's kind of struggling to pay her rent and her tuition, and she ends up getting drawn into the world of being a sugar baby slash prostitute by her classmate. Kind of Hannah Montana style for the rest of the season, she is trying to prevent her world as a law student and her world as a prostitute from colliding, and she's also trying to uncover some potential corruption at the law firm that she's interning at. And I know what you're thinking. Ashley, not another show glorifying prostitution for the male gaze. The prostitute who loves being a prostitute is like such a trope created by men to just indulge in the fantasy that women love fucking like old crusty men. But this show really didn't feel derogatory towards women at all. It's co-written and half of the episodes are directed by a woman, so it genuinely doesn't feel like it's satisfying some male fantasy. It feels like it's about a female character and it's about female sexuality. Tonally, the show is a lot like Gone Girl. It has a lot of that kind of like silent female anger in it, which I love. I feel like the show is kind of the female version of Fight Club, where Fight Club is about being stuck in this corporate environment and feeling this intense desire to get out this like base masculinity by literally beating each other up. Whereas in The Girlfriend Experience, it's this girl who is studious, she's good at her job, she works in this very like sterile work environment, but at the end of the day, like she really just wants to get off, and that's kind of her version of Fight Club, having really like intense sex with people. So I really love this show. I think it is so underrated, and a big reason I wanted to make this video was literally to talk about this show because nobody I know has watched it, and I just want to geek out with other people about this show. My next recommendation is Maniac. Maniac takes place in this kind of like 80s sci-fi vision of the future where two strangers, Owen, who is schizophrenic and suffers from hallucinations, and Annie, who is coping with the loss of her sister, decide to enroll in this experimental drug trial that claims if it works, it could cure them of all mental health problems. In the drug trial, they take a series of different pills that force them to have these like vivid hallucinations slash dreams. Except for some reason, Annie and Owen's dreams keep combining. So each episode consists of a different vision that they have together, and it skips throughout all of these different genres, time periods, settings, characters. There's one where they're like magicians, there's one where they are like in the 80s and they have to steal a rare lemur. I really like that episode. This is another one of those shows that feels like a movie. It's just 10 episodes, it was just a limited series. It stars Emma Stone and Jonah Hill. What the fuck? How did they get them in a TV show? Cinematography is amazing, the acting is amazing. One of my favorite things about the show is the world building. I am such a nerd for these kind of like future slash past worlds where it's like a vision of the future that also feels historical in some elements. For example, in the world of Maniac, there are these things called ad buddies that are literally like a physical human who will sit next to you and read you a bunch of ads, and you can earn money that way. So yeah, overall, if you like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Inception, Black Mirror, if you like kind of these crazy like subconscious dream movies, I would definitely recommend Maniac. My next show is Big Little Lies, which follows the story of 5 mothers in this wealthy Monterey neighborhood. At the beginning of the series, we find out that somebody has been murdered, and we see all of these like police interviews with people in the neighborhood, but we don't know who was murdered and how. So the series is about discovering who was murdered, what was the motivation, who did it, and uncovering the truth about the personal lives of all of these seemingly rich and perfect mothers. This is another show that is a little bit depressing, which is apparently a theme in shows that I like to watch. I don't know what that says about me. It's definitely not the most exciting show from the onset, but if you stick it out and you start to like peel back the layers of all of these characters and see what lies underneath, it becomes a really fascinating series. This is a little bit of a spoiler, but basically throughout the series you find out that Nicole Kidman's character is being abused by her husband, and it is so heartbreaking to see her sessions with a therapist and how she starts off completely in denial that any abuse is happening or that anything is wrong with her relationship, and this therapist slowly like breaks down her walls and makes her realize like what's actually going on in her relationship. I also think it's a great series to watch when you're a little bit older, and I definitely want to rewatch this series if I ever become a mom, because it really focuses on a lot of the nuances of like womanhood and relationships, and I think that as you get older you can appreciate and relate to that a lot more. Side note, but I don't know if you guys relate, like when I was younger my favorite type of movies were all of these like kind of heady action adventure movies, but as I have grown up, I more and more really like realistic TV shows and movies, and I just love seeing my own emotions reflected, and I love seeing just like drama about real people. I think when I was younger, life seemed a lot more simple, so I was like, why would I watch a movie about like marriage or real life? Like, it's not that complicated. But as I get older, I realize that like this shit is so complicated, and it's kind of its like own puzzle to figure out. Anyways, that's why I love Big Little Lies. Also, the acting in this series, like literally they have an all-star cast. I'm giving it 2 Italian hands. That's how good it is. I also really recommend this to all of my guy friends or any guys watching this. A lot of the times guys think that if a show stars all women or is about womanhood, then it's not for them. And I guarantee you this will be an interesting watch for you, and I think it'll also give you a really interesting insight into some of the struggles that women go through motherhood and like being a wife and stuff like that, and I think that's important for men to watch as well. Next up, for something a little bit lighter, I love Friends from College. Friends from College is a comedy about a 40-something couple who moves out to New York and ends up reuniting with all of their friends back from college. They all went to Harvard together, and they end up reigniting some of the same tensions and crushes and immature behaviors that they had when they were 20-somethings. Even though it's about like 40-somethings, at heart, they are still just like equally as confused and horny and silly as they were in their 20s. I mean, I don't know how accurate that is to your 40s, but I do think that kind of throughout your entire life is still like confusing. And even as I've gotten older, I've graduated college, I still sometimes feel like a fucking high schooler. And I feel like deep down everybody just wants to feel like a teenager again, but like minus the weird like loneliness and depression you had in high school, and plus the like 3 nights that were fun in high school when you actually hung out with your friends. This show is so funny, but it also has a little bit of that like juicy soap opera tension. Some characters are cheating on each other, some characters are like getting pregnant. I don't know, I am kind of a sucker for that little like juicy, ooh, what's gonna happen next type of drama. It's a great series if you're looking for a comedy to watch. My last show is Better Call Saul. So Better Call Saul is technically a Breaking Bad spin-off, so if you watch Breaking Bad, you will also love this show. But honestly, even if you haven't watched Breaking Bad, I think it carries its own weight. This show follows Jimmy McGill, who is a former con artist who is struggling to become a respectable lawyer. Our main character starts out as a little bit more of a straight-edged lawyer, but he sees the law screwing over people and taking advantage of good people who just like don't have enough money or they don't have the resources to get the word out and to actually start a class action lawsuit against people who are screwing them. So he takes some like kind of questionable measures to make a commercial to get the word out. That kind of spirals into him seeing other injustices and scamming his way into fixing them. Throughout the series, it follows Jimmy's transformation from this kind of do-gooder public attorney to the criminal lawyer. Literally, not even like a lawyer for criminals. He is like a lawyer who is a criminal himself in Breaking Bad. Similarly to Breaking Bad, what I love about Better Call Saul is the characters. I am convinced that Vince Gilligan could literally write a screenplay about a toenail and I would be interested. He's so good at creating characters that are flawed and messy and complicated, but that you care about deeply and you just want to see what happens to them next. Okay, 2 full LaCroix later, that is all of my favorite TV shows. Those are all of my favorite TV shows. I have lost my ability to use English grammar. I've literally been talking for like 3 hours, and this is also the 3rd time I filmed this video in full this week. I couldn't get it right because I was depressed earlier this week. Sometimes it be like that. Side note, but I don't know if you guys are like getting to the point in quarantine where you're just like, I want to go outside. I need serotonin. Anyways, I'm feeling a little bit better now, and it was fun talking about TV shows with you guys, so if you have recommendations for me, please leave them down below. Lord knows I have the time to watch them, and I will see you guys soon. Bye!